season, and Sean Peterson. All right, we are kicking things off in game number 3 here. And you might have guessed it if Greg Orange's name is on the bill, Jeskai Control. In this case, a mirror match.
So this is one we can expect to go super long. The game is not going to be ended by a quick rush or even by someone jamming a threat early on. It's more apt to go till both players have tremendous number of lands in play, and then you'll see big spells like Expansion Explosion, perhaps Niv Mizzet Perrin having a big impact. Though it looks like both players already struggling to make their land drops.
Which is super important in control matchups.
And worth noting, this is a post-sideboard game, so the dynamic will be a little bit different. The players aren't necessarily going to have dead cards like Deafening Clarion.
You mentioned Expansion Explosion being one of the ways this deck can win, and yeah, we're just going to have to put a Syncopate in the yard. Here's a search for Azcanta for Greg Orange.
Now, Sean definitely wants to fight over this, but one subtle thing that's going on here is, though both players have 4 lands, Sean Peterson only with 1 blue mana, which is going to restrict his ability to fight those important counterspell battles.
All right, so Greg Orange having to put away the search for Azcanta, and Legion Warboss out of the board.
Yeah, that's some nice tech. Punish an opponent who over sideboards and takes out too much of their cheap removal.
So if both people are missing land drops here, do you have to start to kind of play a little bit differently?
Yes and no. Missing land drops is very bad in a control mirror, and especially in a situation like this where you're going to be discarding to hand size. However, you don't necessarily want to panic. Sometimes if you can hold fast and just make those painful discards a couple of times, you can still hang in there and draw out of your mana problems. But it's case by case, and it's part of what makes these matchups so challenging to navigate, is knowing when to go for a threat and when to just pass and be patient.
Legion Warboss sticks here for Greg Orange. Goblin token survives and is able to get in a point of damage, knocking Peterson down to 19.
And here you see why the Warboss is so strong. Sean Peterson has a window to resolve Teferi here, but if he minuses, his Teferi will simply die to the Goblin token. If he pluses, then Greg Orange can make another Goblin token, get a Mentor trigger, and he has 5 power anyway.
So Sean elects just to play his search for Azcanta and pass the turn back over to Greg.
I don't know if I like this from Sean. I think he's playing with fire, letting this Warboss survive. I think he probably needed to just Ixalan's Binding there and hope Greg didn't have another threat.
And now we get to attack with all 3 of our goblins here in the Mentor trigger from the Warboss, bumping up another one.
Now the dynamic of the game is much different. Greg Orange no longer has to be a control deck. He can now play a fish-style game, like a Delver deck, where he's protecting his 1 threat on the battlefield with permission spells, and that can be very difficult for a Jeskai control deck to deal with.
Crackling Drake met here with a disdainful stroke from Peterson. Putting that Sabotage into the yard. See what he chooses to do here on this turn. Greg Orange, of course, known as one of the control masters. He plays it in every event. He's very good at it, makes it look easy. Won Pro Tour 25th anniversary with his teammates Ben Hull and Alan Wu earlier this year in my hometown, Minneapolis.
As a fan of Magic, it's fun when players have personality, right? When they have deck types that they're particularly known for. And, if I'm a control guy or I'm interested in learning about control, Greg Orange is somebody that I'm going to be excited to watch on camera.
For sure. Watching him in that Pro Tour, he just made it look like nothing. Teferi here is going to tuck away that Legion Warboss. And the window is now open for Greg Orange to play that Crackling Drake, draw a card, hit his land drop, attack Teferi, Yeah. Goodbye.
Okay, but now Sean Peterson has used this Search for Azcanta to get pretty far ahead in mana, both filtering to find land drops and also now transforming into Azcanta the Sunken Ruin. And now let's see what he can do with all this mana. He could either deploy Nezahal Primal Tide, he could play Teferi plus another spell. Now I noticed that he has Negate, but not a permission spell that's going to answer the Warboss on the way back down. So this is a tricky situation to navigate, I think, from both players. Choosing which spell to cast on this crucial turn is going to be challenging and could easily determine the impact of the game.
Sean Peterson from Illinois has been playing for about 7 years. He flies planes. It's pretty cool.
That's very cool.
All right, looks like we're thinking about this binding here on the Crackling Drake.
Yeah, see, I don't know how far this gets Sean Peterson if Greg Orange's play is to recast the Legion Warboss.
And that is exactly his play. Hits the table.
If Greg had made the judgment call to, say, tap out for Teferi and Sean Peterson could negate it, then it's really good for Sean, but he's just falling further and further behind the Warboss by, taking pains to hold up negate, which it seems like negate is not what this game is about right now.
All right, another Teferi hitting the table for Peterson. But all of those creatures on Orange's side of the battlefield are going to be able to pressure it. Yeah, once again, just minusing to tuck the Warboss down in Orange's library.
So now what maybe Sean can hope for is if Greg sends only one Goblin token at Teferi, he can try to seal away it. Now, we know that Greg Orange has permission spells in his hand, but at least if Sean can force Greg to spend his mana and a permission spell on that, maybe the shields will be down if he has a good draw.
See how Orange decides to attack here. Can't quite tell where those goblins were going, but seal away happens nonetheless. All right, so it appears 2 went to Peterson's face. He's down to 5. Teferi lives at 1. Niv Mizzet in hand for Orange 2. And there he is. Niv himself coming out to play. And Teferi at 1 is pretty precarious with Niv Mizzet, even at 2 on the table.
It's actually not that bad of a position for Sean. He can Justice Strike.
Nezahal.
Okay, so he's gonna play the 7/7, then he's gonna Justice Strike the Niv Mizzet with the 2 lands that he untaps from Teferi. He will go down to 4 life if Greg decides to point the damage at him.
Yep, down to 4.
Now we'll see what Greg Orange can do with this turn. He found Explosion, which can deal an additional 2 points of damage. He doesn't have a 7th land.
Another Niv in hand.
Boy, he's so close in so many ways.
Yeah. And of course, there's that Warboss back again. Nezahal, the Primal Tide, brought in a 7/7, can't be countered. And Peterson has no maximum hand size, BT dubs. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, Sean gets to draw a card. Niv Mizzet here for Greg Orange. You can also discard 3 cards and exile it and return to the battlefield tapped under Sean's control at the beginning of the next end step. Fairy Tick Up. Another Justice Strike. Greg gets to draw, ping. Sean down to 3.
So now Sean is relatively stable here. He has answered the 2 uncounterable spells that Greg Orange had. Now Greg, you know, it's still precarious position, especially because Greg does have that expansion explosion. So what Greg can do is try to stack threats by using expansion at the end of Peterson's turn and then untapping and playing something like Legion Warboss plus something else.
Sure.
And just overload Peterson's mana.
Teferi Replacement here from Sean Peterson. Deals with the 2/2 Goblin. Greg Orange still on 20 life.
It's a big window for Greg. He has access to 7 mana once he makes his land drop, so he can do something like Teferi and defend it with Syncopate or Negate. And that unlocks a lot of options, including tucking his opponent's Teferi, tucking the Ixalan's Binding. But let's remember that every counterspell battle that we fight is more cards in Sean Peterson's hands due to that Nezahal Primal Tide.
All right, so Legion Warboss hits the table for Greg Orange. The 2 Goblins get in. We'll knock Peterson down to 2.
Actually, those Goblins decided to go at Teferi.
Oh, they did. Yes, sorry.
I like that decision because you want to force Sean into a position where he has to make a move. If you leave the Teferi in play, then Sean can just sort of keep ticking up his Planeswalker and passing with his mana open. And that's a situation that's very dangerous with Nezahal on the battlefield. But now you force Sean, okay, you must deal with Legion Warboss, and I have Expansion Explosion if I can ever find a window. So I think Greg Orange is now going to win this game because Teferi is off the battlefield.
Teferi hits the bin, Niv Mizzet on the table. Negate for Orange was the draw.
I think this is it. I think Greg just has to try the explosion.
Steam Vents. Take 2. And here we go. Boom. And there is a handshake. Greg Orange taking down that match versus Sean Peterson. Just Got Control mirror 2 games to 1. And Just Got Control is a deck that, you know, I've been thinking a lot of since the Pro Tour because it does seem to be pretty well matched against a lot of the creature strategies.
Yeah, I mean, we saw Sam Black's deck with the Deafening Clarions, the Settle the Wreckages, just tailor-made to beat aggressive decks. Jeskai has access to all those cards too, in addition to the blue card drawing and permission. That was a fascinating match that we just watched there. I think both players had a number of close decisions that they could have made to navigate the games in different ways, and that was one that was it was certainly not predetermined who was supposed to win that game.
All right, we've got more Time Walk Magic for you, so let's head back on down to the tables. In this case, it's Brendan Ayers versus Max McVitie. Mono White Aggro versus Just Got Control, and you're just talking about it. We're going to start in game 1 here, and we'll see if Aggro can get in fast enough to beat Just Got Control before it has all of its tools down. Sky Marcher, Aspirin, and a Snubhorn Sentry. Little snubs for McVitie. I do see a Deafening Clarion in hand, though, for Brandon Ayers. Aspirin gets in for another 2. There's a Hunted Witness. McVitie was named by Andrew Ellenbogen, our Pro Tour champion, for being somebody who helped him find his final deck that he brought to the PT. There's a Deafening Clarion, so McVitie will just be left with the 1/1 lifelinker.
Please check them and find your seat. If you don't see your name
So this going just according to plan for the Jeskai player, you really want to have that turn 3 Deafening Clarion. It's almost like if you have the turn 3 Deafening Clarion, the game is going to be up for grabs, and if you don't, sometimes you just get run over. But this is a great position, especially with McVitie missing his 3rd land drop, and now Brandon Ayers is very well stabilized. I think this game is pretty comfortably going to go in favor of the control player.
Then just being able to play a Teferi if he wants, no big deal. He's got so many cards in hand that are so terrible for Max McVitie. Cleansing Nova right there in the middle. I mean, I even signed despondently when somebody cast a Chemister's Insight. Crackling Drake number 2. Boink. In for 1. McVitie down to 20. And yeah, these land drops that he's missing are just pounding that nail even further into the coffin here. Wow, Lava Coil, your 1/1 lifelinker.
Partly just to get a second
Yeah.
sorcery into the graveyard.
paper pairing up. If you don't find your name online, please refresh.
McVitie will fall to 16 after that attack from the Drakes.
This, by the way, is a fairly normal fail case of the mono white aggro decks. We did see, sadly, the Pro Tour end with Luis Scott Vargas mulliganing to oblivion, but that's
right.
When you play a low land count aggro deck, this just happens sometimes. I mean, it looks great when you can curve out and make your land drops and hit 3 on turn 3, but that's only some percentage of the games.
Brandon here using the lifelink ability on Deafening Clarion. And Max McVitie is going to scoop him up. And we're coming back to the booth here because matches are being announced behind us for the tournament. And Brandon Ayers is the one who took down that match over Max McVitie. So we'll be back with more Magic coming up. Round 5 coming at you in just a few minutes. Don't go anywhere.